All right. Um, Welcome. My name is Jenny. I'm a part-timer out of Local 396 in Los Angeles, California. And welcome to the Make UPS Pay for Supervisors Working webinar. So today we're going to talk about how to enforce supervisors working contract language, how to get members involved, and how to supercharge your grievances, and then how to share victories to spread that enforcement and keep up the fight. And then we will go on to the question and answer. So to ask your questions, there's a little QA box at the bottom of your screen. So you can just click it and type the question into the dialog box. We probably won't be able to get to all of them, but we will try our best. So real quick, this is a webinar with Teamsters United. And if you like it, you can join TDU by going to this link, tdu.org/memberships. And you could get some nice merch if you join for a year or 3 years. Okay, and then we also have a supervisors working toolkit available for people who are just starting with this. This toolkit is very helpful for starting the supervisors working campaign at your workplace. And you can find it at that link. Yeah, you can also follow this link to take action and stay involved. Okay, so why is it bad when supervisors work? They love to do it. I always tell my supervisors, I don't know why they went management if they love touching boxes so much. But the bottom line, supervisors aren't helping us when they do bargaining unit work. They're taking money out of our wallets. And UPS has supervisors work so that they can make cuts to our staffing, as we've seen lately, and cut our hours, send us home before the work is over. And in that way, UPS saves money. So as a part-timer on a preload shift, a lot of us want more hours every day. And whenever a supervisor works, a Teamster loses the opportunity to get extra hours and extra money in their paycheck. So in our hub, we try first to always enforce language by just yelling at supervisors when they're working, which sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And we file a lot of supervisors working grievances, and make sure to request the highest penalties, even if it's like a minute, a few minutes, because that's our work. And if the company needs extra hands throughout the day, then they should have staffed the operation correctly or not laid people off, because we know right now nationwide, the volume's down, layoffs are up. So there's no excuse for supervisors to be working. They're literally taking someone's job of someone who's on the street. So the supervisors working language is a tool to fight back and protect Teamster work and Teamster jobs. And hopefully this webinar is helpful for that.
All right. Thank you so much, Jenny, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Prescott. I work on staff with TDU, and luckily we have a lot of expert members who can talk us through the best practices for winning supervisors working grievances. So first, to cover the basics of enforcement, I want to introduce Chris Cecil, who is a shop steward out of Local 391 in North Carolina. So take it away, Chris.
Thanks, Paul. So one of the really fortunate things about our contract is that the supervisor's working language is very clear cut. Right there in Article 3, Section 7, the employer shall make every reasonable effort to maintain a sufficient workforce to staff its operations with bargaining unit employees. When additional employees are necessary, the supervisor shall exhaust all established local practices to first use bargaining unit employees, including where applicable, double shifting, early calling, and overtime. The burden is always on UPS to prove they did everything they could to give good work to bargaining unit members before doing the work themselves, generally barring a work of or an act of God. So we also have very clear-cut penalties in the contract. The first two violations on a supervisor working pays out at double time for the grievance for the time that the supervisor works. So, for example, if you make $21 an hour as a relatively new and junior part-timer, and you fall on a supervisor for the first or second time in a rolling 9-month period, the pay penalty would be $42 an hour for all hours worked by the supervisor. The third violation in a 9-month period pays out at quadruple time. So again, under the example of a junior inside UPS part-timer, that'd be $21 an hour. If the supervisor had 2 prior violations in the last rolling 9-month period, the penalty is $84 an hour. And that's something we want in this current contract.
All right. Thanks, Chris. And, the next question, we want people to be able to leave this webinar and immediately start taking action next week. So for people, maybe this is their first time starting to file, what are some tips you have to make sure, people don't get tripped up right away on this issue?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, number one, you need to figure out what constitutes supervisors working. Generally, that's going to be progressing packages through the operation, although other things apply to supervisors working as well. Article 17 covers setup work, preparing an area, setting up rollers in an outbound belt, getting bags in small sort. That is setup work, despite what your supervisor might tell you. Also, don't go at it alone. Always involve your fellow Teamsters. Tell them what you're doing, tell them why. Try to get as many people on board as you can, either as witnesses or people also filing with you. Don't make yourself a target. One thing I always advise people on when they're interested in filing on supervisors working is to make sure their own backyard is clean. If you have attendance issues, if you have a bunch of methods violations already on you, you should probably try to address that as best you can before you start filing grievances, because the company, if they've let it slide before, they're absolutely going to start holding your feet to the fire on those things. And lastly, start with low-hanging fruit. Every single building has that one supervisor or manager that everybody can't stand. Uh, People will cheer you on and laugh and might even themselves want to file supervisors working grievances on that one supervisor. So again, that supervisor's always yelling, that's always raising his voice and being disrespectful. That's going to be the low hanging fruit to go after first.
All right. And then, to kind of really break this down, so you see a supervisor working, what should be the first thing you do and say when you see this?
So one of the first things you should do is make sure you're being respectful and being calm. I generally advise people not to yell if they can avoid it, but ask why they're working. A really good tip that I heard recently was to ask the supervisor who they're training. Take note of their response. If they claim, "Oh, Joe Smith is running 20 minutes late, I have to cover a spot," or "We had 3 call-ins and didn't want to call in doubles," or they yell at you and cuss at you. These are all things to take note of, especially for agreements. And really, the most important thing, again, is don't get jammed up. If you're told to go back to work, go back to work. Include that in agreements. Always work as instructed. Don't get jammed up on insubordination or professional conduct while you're enforcing the contract.
Do you want to go through, what are the details that you should be taking down when you're observing supervisors working?
Yeah, you always want to have as much information as you possibly can. You always want to have times and dates, and those times need to be as accurate as you can get them. The supervisor's name, the time the supervisor started working and stopped working, what type of work they did. Be specific. Supervisor Smith worked in the D bag, for example, or Supervisor Smith was unloading in door 72. Also work areas, if they're on PD4, if they're in the small sort, if they're in the clerical cage, and really critical as witnesses, that gets people moving and definitely reinforces your grievance if management tries to deny it. Also, always do this kind of documentation off the clock. So one tip, if you want to document the time, but you're on the clock and you're worried about forgetting, learn how to take a screenshot on your phone. Usually it's just 2 keys, maybe one of your volume keys and your power button. And you can use that as a timestamp and just go back through your phone when you get off work to make notes of when the supervisor started and stopped working. Additionally, you can use the TDU supervisor's working report form to write down key information to help you with your grievances.
Right, great. And, you know, it's important, especially for shop stewards, to be prepared to use every tool possible for a successful supervisor's working grievance. So for this part, we're going to also bring in to this conversation Lynette Dill, who's a shop steward from Local 908 in Ohio. But first, I'll start with you again, Chris. How can we use seniority lists and extra work lists to our benefit?
So you really want to look at seniority lists, extra work lists, and preferred job lists. For example, if there is a preferred job, say in my building on the E-reg line, if they're critically understaffed and there are people on that list and supervisors are always working, then maybe it's time for somebody to get a preferred job. Um, you also want to make sure there is an actual extra worker call-in list. If the company isn't maintaining a formal call-in list, that is a great way to jam them up every time. Some operations are pretty bad about supervisors just having a list of phone numbers in their phone. That's not a call-in list. It's not making sure you're going by seniority.
And then also for you, Chris, what about other company documents that stewards should be aware of to use for grievances?
So there's a couple of really important ones. Attendance reports, especially inside the building. Managers are going over their pre-sort meetings every day with their supervisors about who was absent and why, and having an idea of how bad the absenteeism. It's a good idea to know that going into filing a grievance if you can. Additionally, area operations reports. If a manager tries to claim that, oh, we had X amount of call-ins, say in the unload, and then you look at the operations report and you see 4 people went home early, clearly they're not making an effort to staff the operation.
Thanks, Chris. And then turning to Lynette, you know, when you do see supervisors working, what are the important questions that stewards should be asking?
Well, as Chris said, first thing, are you training somebody? I agree with him. Don't get jammed up. If they say they are, start there. Always ask if they've called everybody. You know, don't leave your work area. If they don't want to ask you, go back to your work area and go from there. But always have the time, the date, who's working, and look around and see if there was any other members that also witnessed this, so that when you do file the grievance, you have other witnesses. And if no one else was offered the work, give management a chance to correct the violation by putting the members to work.
All right. And then as a steward, you know, Lynette, do you have tips for how, you know, we can keep track of violations?
The best way I've found is to make a separate pile of grievances that are all supervisor working, calendar in my phone, you know, who was the supervisor working. You know, if I see it again, go back and look, okay, he was within 9 months.
And I think also, you know, I don't know if you use like spreadsheets can be really helpful to keep track of all these things. Making copies of the grievances can all help. Let's be on the same page. And so, you know, the whole point of this is not to just be an army of one. You know, we want more and more members to be filing and winning the grievances. As Chris mentioned earlier, this is part of what puts pressure on the company to do the right thing, is when more people are doing it. So, Chris, can you say something about how do you teach other members to file on this issue?
Yeah, that's absolutely critical. There's no such thing as a one-man army. Always look for opportunities to teach other people. Point it out. Like there might be a time as a steward, I'm getting called over to a work area and I address supervisors that are working in front of me. But before I go back to my original work area, I might mention to somebody on the floor, if this is happening regularly, you need to hold them accountable to the contract. Because typically for the steward, if they address it, it'll stop. And then if they don't work in the area, they're going to start right back up again. That's where it's on every member to enforce the contract. I always keep copies of sample grievances on me. I will hand them to people along with grievance forms so they have an idea of how to fill it out. I always make myself available. Hey, if you need help wording this to make sure we're set up, I always advise people to try to get as many witnesses as they can, usually at least 2. But the most important thing is to train other people to file grievances with you.
And to follow up on this, you know, we know there's a lot of people probably not filing grievances on this issue, maybe not as involved. So how do you kind of choose who needs this kind of extra coaching and help to, how do you choose who you go to first to start getting them more involved?
It's typically going to be somebody who has raised the issue, somebody that comes to work every day on time, that's not having attendance issues, that's not having ongoing disciplinary issues. Those are generally going to be the best folks to help enlist in this fight against the company. Sometimes you have different levels of success. If somebody is having attendance issues, you'll hear that reason, hey, I'm already on a suspension, I don't want to get jammed up further. So keep that in mind as well.
Absolutely. And then, next we can talk a little bit about what we call the push-pull factor. I mean, we know once people start filing more and more grievances, we know management is going to react. So, Chris, how does management usually react when we start filing more, and how do we prepare for that?
So it depends. If there's a culture of consistent contract enforcement in your building, there probably won't be a serious reaction. If there's not, and I've been in both situations, if they've been allowed to get away with bloody murder for a long time and you start holding them accountable, they're gonna flip out because they're not used to it. When I first started filing grievances before I was a steward, I had a division manager threaten me in front of 10 people. But we also didn't have a consistent culture of contract enforcement back then. And they're gonna look at your attendance, they're gonna look at your methods, you're gonna get more scrutiny. Anything that goes above and beyond something they could argue is normal is definitely going to be retaliation of the NLRA, though.
And we have some tips on other things we can do, including enforcement on the name tag. And so, when it comes to involving members, there are many ways we can involve members around this issue. And we're going to hear from some more members about ways they're doing this in their buildings. So first we have from Local 71, George Powell, if you want to talk about using group chats, how you can use group chats in your building to get people involved.
Yes, good morning. Yeah, one thing I normally do is I normally try to get them in a mental mindset. Like, for instance, why do you need to file grievances? How does it affect you long term? And in doing that, I normally, mention about the wages. So I try to let them see if a supervisor take 10 minutes from you daily, how much does that amount to by the end of the year? And I try to let them understand that 6 to 8 days of wages they will lose over a period of time. Not to mention if they work for 10, 20 years, how it affects their pension as well. So all those factors is something that I would probably tell my other employees and that, hey, this is not just now, it's something that affects you in the future. And also for the grievances, when I write grievances, I will make sure that I let everybody get involved by buying breakfast for everyone. And as mentioned earlier, who doesn't want to get paid double time? And those are some of the things that I try to encourage them. Say, hey, this is what you will get, and I will even file the grievance for them and help them write it up as well.
All right, thanks, George. And we're going to come back to you to talk more about the breakfast a little later. And so next I want to...
one other thing that's important as well, that's very effective in terms of keeping track of supervisors working. UPS have a spreadsheet that they use for the lineup sheets. And I normally encourage them, if they can do it discreetly, take those lineup sheets, and whichever section that the supervisors are working, they can write down the time when they start and when they stop. But I always make sure, make sure you keep it discreet. If you cannot do it discreet, don't even touch it.
All right, thank you, George. So next I want to bring in, again, we have some more member experts here. Omar Moreno from Local 572 in Los Angeles. So can you talk about, filing under top rate to make sure UPS is paying the most?
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, so in Gardena, in our hub, what we tend to do is since some of the members are intimidated or fear of retaliation, and they're not willing to file a grievance, since we make the higher rate of pay, the shop stewards, we tend to just ask them to have good, thorough documentation, and then we'll file the grievance. And once we get payment on the grievance, we'll show them, hey, look, this is how filing a grievance, the benefits of it, and we let them know, look, you file a grievance, this covers your union dues for, about 7-8 months, depending on what your union dues rate is. So that's how we try to get them more involved, make sure that the documentation is thorough. That way, if management pushes back, the witness that gives us the time, is benefits from it. So what we do is once we receive the payments, we pay the member that was willing to be a witness. And what we do with any grievances that we file ourselves, we'll have meetings at the park with the money. We'll buy food, sodas. We'll buy hoodies. We'll have hoodies made with Gardena Local 572 logos on it, and and encourage members to come to the meetings. And by participating and come to the meetings, we give them hoodies, and they wear them at work, and we have more union visibility. And when members ask, hey, how can I get a hoodie, we explain to them, come to the meetings, participate, educate yourself, and you'll receive a hoodie. So that's how we make our filing of grievances effective. Back to you.
So, Mark, there's nothing like food and gear to get people involved and excited. And as we mentioned before, under this new contract, we can get up to quadruple time for violations. So we're going to bring in Nisa from Local 222 in Utah. Can you talk about how you carried out a successful quadruple time filing campaign?
Good morning. Sure. That's awesome. How I was successful, how we were successful was getting to know our members in every section of the building, right? On each belt, and keeping really good notes, making sure that I'm paying attention to, good morning, how are you doing? How are things going on your belt? And in our hub, there are, let's say, 7 supervisors, 10 supervisors. Making sure that the conversations I'm having with rank and file are out loud. I like for everybody to hear those types of conversations. How are things going on your belt? Oh, what have you? Utilizing, being able to have the contract language, being able to utilize that contract language about having our phones on us in the hub and continuing the communication there, getting text messages with let's say 10 supervisors working, 10 supervisors. It isn't hard to keep track after the 3rd violation, Hey, Supervisor Joe Smith, this is your 2nd time, in 2 weeks that you've been working. What's going on? Are you training or what have you? And I was saying out loud, hey, are you working? What's the situation? And, oh, well, so-and-so was late, or whatever reasons they come up with, or safety, we all know they have so many reasons for working, but utilizing contract language so it's easy for them to look up. Have you utilized to ensure we have a proper workforce? And you already know the answer to all the, and then saying out loud, well, just so you know, this is quadruple time. It's been really effective and stops them in their tracks or creates situation where we're able to enforce our authority on the floor and feel more confident.
Right. Great. Thank you. And it sounds like, I mean, it all comes back to being in touch with members, having a communication network to be aware of what's going on, constantly getting people involved. You know, it all comes back to that. And if we do that, we can be successful. And so building on this, you know, if we win grievances, but no one else knows about it, that really doesn't do much for building the union and getting other members involved. You know, NISA can win all the money in the world for itself, and that's great. But what does that do for the union if we're not getting other people involved? So now we're going to bring some of our member experts back to talk about how we can actually celebrate our wins so other people actually know they can also win these benefits. So I'm going to go back to Omar and ask, you know, what do you do with your big penalty checks when you get them for a supervisor's working grievance?
Well, like I said before, we tend to have meetings at the park, and you know, have the members come out and participate, and it gives us an opportunity to educate them. You know, educate them on the specific contract language that they might want to discuss, and you know, showing them how to you know, approach and file grievances. And so that's what we let them know. We say, hey, look, this food was sponsored by UPS, you know, with filing of grievances. So we also let them know, hey, you know, that's, you know, these supervisor working grievances, you know, we use them for educational purposes, for flyers, for going to the TDU conventions. You know, that the UPS sponsors all our the tools that we use to, you know, educate members. So that's some of the things that we try to let people know, that hey, don't feel discouraged. If the grievance process takes long, you know, it's gonna come, and it's just a waiting game. You know, UPS likes to prolong the grievance procedure, and you know, to discourage us from filing the grievances. You just got to stay consistent and militant, and it's gonna come. So just be patient, and it's a waiting game. And we just got to be, you know, just wait, and you know, you can utilize the money for educational purposes. So that's how we tend to approach the supervisor working grievances, and making UPS pay for, you know, stealing bargaining unit work.
Yeah, and that's a great point. You know, these grievances are not just opportunities to get more money in members' pockets, but to educate them about the union and about our contract. And as I mentioned previously, you know, one of the best ways to get people involved is food. We all love food. So I'm going to turn back to George Powell now from Local 71 in North Carolina. So George used his grievance money to share some treats with his building. Can you talk about what you did there, George?
Yes. Well, the first thing I did was I let each member see the check that is being received, that is written out. And you know, the check that the last one that I filed was up to about $1,000. And when others see it, it's like the eye pop open and say, wow, is this what we can get? So I say, yes, if they're in violation of the contract. So this is the money that we can get once we filed it properly. And I remember I was on a vacation, and I was in the area one morning, and I told everybody that I was going to get them breakfast. I go to the Bojingles. It's a chicken restaurant, and I bought. I think I spent about $200 out of the check, and I bought sandwiches, biscuit sandwiches, and I bought drink, and I take it to the building, and I distribute it around. And at present, I have a couple of grievance check that is pending right now, that I inform other members that when these checks comes out, we're going to go down to like a Golden Carol, and we're going to sit down, have a breakfast, and get them give them more information about how they can be a big part of it. I even to the point where I give out cash to some of the members from the check as well, because it helps sign it and so forth. And what it does for them, it helps them to come on board and have the willingness to join on in the fight with the grievance.
That's awesome. You're making me want to work in your building now. But that's a great way of getting people involved and making things fun. And
I'd like to say one more thing, Paul.
yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Also to the members up there that out there that feel that it's a form of snitching, because I've heard this in the past from other members that they see it as it's a form of snitching, filing grievances, and we've nipped that in the bud immediately and you know, put it in a different perspective where we tell them, hey, if there's a shortage on your pay, are you going to file a grievance, or is that also considered snitching? It's not. It's a contract violation, and that's how you have to see it, because I think some members might see it that way, and because they have certain relationships with a supervisor, and we tell them, no, it's not snitching. It's, you're right. That's what we pay union dues for. So when you put it in that perspective, it tends to, they see it in a different way. It's not snitching. It's that's what we pay union dues for. And obviously, if there's a shortage on your pay, you're going to file a grievance. So that's that. I just wanted to address that.
Thanks. That's a great point, Omar. Now, you know, people have been on TV webinars before. You know, something we like to talk about a lot is holding parking lot meetings. But we do know for part-timers, this is not always the most realistic option. So I'm going to throw it back to Lynette Dill to talk about, you know, how do you use breakfast meetings to organize members in your building?
I've found that texting, if I want to have a meeting with members, giving them a couple days notice, hey, Wednesday, if you're available, let's meet at, you know, Kistner's after work for breakfast, who's available. So what that does is it takes us away from the building where we can have more of an open conversation. I show them settled grievances that we've had in the building. I've let them know about, you know, conversations I've had with, you know, management of things going on, other things I've learned through TDU, and talking to other stewards, which it seems that it opens the conversation up, that it's a lot more laid back, that they ask more questions, where things are in the contract. So I've noticed a lot more people that are getting involved when we have that breakfast away from the building itself.
All right. Yeah, that's great. And it's a good point you make, you know, being away from the building, people can be a little bit more comfortable in sharing information and getting to know each other. So, you know, these are just some ideas that we members have been using across the country. We hope this can start generating, you know, activity in the building where you work. Before we say more about ways we can get involved, I want to remind people, you know, at the very end of this, we'll be taking some Q&A, and our member experts will come back on to address those. So remember, at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A chat where you can submit your questions. But now to talk about, you know, how we can get involved from here, I'm going to kick it to Omar's partner in crime in Gardena, Carlos Silva.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Yes, I am Omar's partner in crime in Gardena. We are the Gardena boys. I just want to say that, you know, everybody needs to use these toolkits that are provided here in this webinar. Use them to help you out in your yard. Use them to get you started. And make sure that at the end of the webinar, you fill out the feedback form and try to get in touch with us if you need any help getting started. You know, we can help you with webinars like this. We can help you with any workshops, leaflets, anything that you need. TDU is there to help you out to get started. Join TDU. TDU is a great organization to be part of. They give you a lot of education. They give you a lot of information, like webinars like this, to help you get started and to build your confidence so you can move forward and fight back the supervisors, fight back the company, and sometimes even including your own local if they're not strong enough. We're going to have a webinar next Sunday, especially for drivers on OJAs. Stay involved, and please share this information with your co-workers. We need participation. Thank you. There you go, Paul.
All right. Thanks so much, Carlos. Yeah, you know, this webinar is not just for us to talk about these issues. We want people to be getting involved. So please fill out the forum so we can get in touch with you to start implementing these things in your building. So again, we're going to now turn to Q&A so we can bring back our member experts, and whoever wants to start addressing these questions can jump in. So one of them, to start with a basic thing, but this is something we hear a lot of time. How do we deal with fellow union members who might be scared to write a grievance, often because of fears of retaliation, or maybe they've experienced retaliation in the past? What is the best way to deal with that? Members who might be a little bit afraid to start filing these grievances.
Can I take this one, Paul?
Yeah.
So I have to credit this one to Beth Brislaw. You have to move people from A to Z, and somebody that's scared to file a supervisor's working grievance, getting them to file a grievance might be your Z activity. Getting them to move and progress. Maybe you start off with them being a witness. That's a very low threshold for somebody to be on. And to make sure they understand their rights, so they don't have to talk to management about the grievance without a shop steward present. Also, I'll share a real quick anecdote. In my building recently, and I'm sure everyone else's building, there has been a lot of crackdown with progressive disciplinary methods and attendance and all sorts of stuff. And I had a small group that was being targeted by management. And the opposite happened. They started filing supervisors working grievances because they were being targeted. And it actually caused management to back off. So that street goes both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chris.
Can I say something? Also with the if a person is scared to file a supervisor grievance, I also highlight the benefit of the supervisors cracking down on them. I normally tell them they don't care if they try to work you 1 or 2 hours to get you out of the building, as long as they get it done within a minimum amount of time. And I said, when you look at the supervisors' wages, their wages is set in stone, meaning they are guaranteed 5.5 hours or 5 hours each day, no matter how many hours they work. That's a guaranteed pay for them. We are not guaranteed. Whatever we get, whatever time we put in, that's what our check's going to be. So I said, just look at it that way as a principal thing. They already got their check set while you have to put the time in to get it. And if you're scared, like I said, little at a time, a witness, and then the principle behind it, and that will probably, get them courageous or encourage them to move forward and want to take part in the grievance.
I like to speak up, make a point on that also. What we tend to do, Carlos, Dave, and myself, is what management tends to do is when you ask them why are they working, they'll tend to stop working when you confront them. And then when you turn your back, they'll do it again. It's like they're playing a game. So what we tend to do is let them work and then ask them why they worked at the end of the shift, because that's the way they try to get around us confronting them. And we let the member know, hey, as long as let us know and we'll go talk to the supervisor. We'll deal with the supervisor at the end of the night or at the end of the morning on why that supervisor was working, because we've encountered that where we ask them why are they working, and then they'll stop working. So then when you turn your back, they'll do it again. So to just eliminate that process, we'll just ask them why they were working from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. in the morning. That way we allow them to dig themselves in a hole, and then we address it afterwards.
Thanks, Omar. One question that has come up a lot is, sometimes their locals might be backed up with a lot of grievances. So, how long should it be taking to settle these grievances? What do we do if it's taking a long time? How do we encourage people to still be filing in that kind of situation? And also kind of related to this, what if, dealing with people feeling that the settlement amount not be enough? How do we kind of navigate that issue, especially if you're a steward?
I'd like to chime in on that. We at our local, we tell the grievant or any employee that filed a grievance that requests for the shop steward that filed the grievance on your behalf to be there. That way, because what they tend to do is they get intimidated and they make them an offer and say, hey, we'll give you half of your grievance. And, you know, the member is a little intimidated because they've never been in that situation. So they'll tend to just give in. You know, with us being in there, you know, we demand that there's no cuts. You know, we got to make them pay because it waters down the grievance, and that's the way that the company tends to, you know, get around, you know, the payment of punishing the company for, you know, doing our work.
Can I jump in here for a
Some
second?
people.
Go ahead, Chris, and then someone else.
One other thing that the company will do to discourage members from filing is, again, to delay grievance meetings. This is a pretty routine thing. If they can wait you out and get you discouraged because you didn't get a payment within a month of filing agreements or 2 months of filing agreements, then they've won. The most important thing to do is to be consistent. Make sure that you're filing on violations that you see. One big mistake I usually see that comes up every once in a while is a member will file grievances for a short period and then stop. They either get frustrated or maybe they were filing grievances because they're getting ready to go on vacation. Be consistent about it. It's easier to make you go away and ignore you if you've only filed a couple grievances and you go away. If you're being consistent, it's harder for the company to ignore you, and it's harder for the union to ignore you.
Thanks
Yeah.
for that.
All right. So on the question you asked, you know, how do we keep the members motivated if it's taking a long time for the grievance to get resolved and if the local is really not doing anything, right? So what we do in Gardena is we tell the members, we tell the grievant that is money in the bank. It's money that you didn't have, and just let it sit there. You know what I mean? I know there's 10 days that the grievance needs to be resolved, but if the business agent is not moving forward, just hold on. It's okay. It's money in the bank that you didn't have before. And to put pressure on the business agent, what we tell our members is to go to the local meetings once a month with the date and the grievance number that you have and bring it up. Bring it up into the meeting. Bring it up and tell them, why is it taking so long? We need this grievance to be resolved. And just keep putting pressure on the business agents to motivate them to resolve the grievance. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but just keep on filing the grievance. It's money in the bank for you. That's what I have, brother.
Thank you, Carlos. Another good question we got, someone asked, have you seen them actually restaff areas where supervisors were working, or, have you seen jobs actually created in your building from supervisors working grievances?
I have. I'll tell a brief story on that. I am a clerk and a hazmat responder at the UPS Greensboro facility. And a couple years ago, we had an issue on the night shift where the night sort clerical area was basically staffed with supervisors. I think there were probably 2 or 3 supervisors that worked routinely. And these are not 22-3 jobs, but these are some of the best part-time jobs in my building. And every grievance I filed, along with the penalty pay, I requested that the company post additional hazmat responder and clerical jobs. And eventually, when we got our settlement, we, in writing, got from the sort manager that they would create additional, I think it was 1 additional hazmat job and 2 additional clerical jobs. And one of those hazmat jobs now under the new contract has an extra $1 an hour.
Mm.
I'd like
Yes.
to throw in
Okay.
my building, we had supervisors that thought responding to hazmats was their job. Through probably, I want to say 25, 30 grievances from about 6 people, we now have 2 additional hazmat responders and 2 additional hazmat responders on our PM side. So people that stuck with it, we got the additional work for the part-timers.
That's awesome to hear. So, it is possible. I think it takes probably a lot of, consistency, but I mean, it is possible to make headway on that through these grievances.
Got something, Paul?
Yeah.
The majority of the grievances that we've been filing in our barn is on the other side of the building, where a lot of the supervisor working grievances that were filed were on the blue belt, and by consistently filing, we were actually able to have 22.3 jobs created at in that area. So instead of the jobs being in a different part of the building, we actually got them created, and we have two as of last week, two new 22.3 jobs created there. So it's benefited us.
Awesome. It's great to hear. Another question, we mentioned this briefly, but a person says, name tags have never been utilized by management here. Now that we have tons of supervisors from closed sorts and other buildings, how do we address the issue of them not wearing name tags, and which article and section of the contract is that?
What we're going to do in our building is we're going to file daily. That is what we've decided to do. My building is small. We have like 6 supervisors, but we've decided we are going to file daily, because this doesn't let alone affect us, but it also affects those that are filing for supervisor working, because you can ask them a name and they'll give you a false name. And the identification is under Article 20, Section 5 of the National Master. So the group of my stewards and I, we've decided we're just going to belt them every day until they get their IDs ready.
Can I ask something on that real quick, Paul?
Yeah.
If a supervisor is not wearing a name tag and they refuse to identify themselves, I would include that in the grievance. That would be an aggravating factor in case management tries to deny it. And as Lynette said, if a supervisor provides a false name, I would actually say it's an integrity issue. And I would raise that during the grievance hearing. That's a whole nother can of worms for a management person to be committing integrity violations. And it's going to make the manager look really bad in front of the labor manager.
Can I tail in on that? Actually, the language states it requires the supervisor to provide their name upon request. So you are right. You can bring it up as an integrity issue too.
Good point. And I think this kind of gets back to the push-pull thing we mentioned earlier. We can play that game too. If they're going to harass people about uniforms or whatever, we can call them to account on name tags. And another, I first want to just remind people again, please fill out the feedback form so we can get in touch. If we're going to take some more questions, but if your question wasn't answered, we won't be able to get to everyone. This is the way that an organizer can call you to talk more about your question and taking action. So I just want to remind people of that form. This is how we translate this into action in your building. But another question I think an important one is, how and when is quadruple time triggered? If you are the third to file in the supervisor, but you did not file the first two, how do you know how many times they've been written up? Does anyone want to address that?
I'll take that one, Paul. It's the third violation in 9 months. You don't necessarily have to be the person to file the first or second violation. And that's why this toolkit is so helpful. That's why having a group chat with other members that are enforcing the contract in your building is so important, so that you know when to request that quadruple time in the grievance.
Yes. And us in Gardena, what we do is when we file the grievances, we put the supervisor's name, and in parentheses we'll put all hours work are at quadruple pay. That way the business agent, the member, and labor is aware that they're under the quadruple pay violation.
And again, as Chris said, this kind of comes back to coordination. If you're not coordinating, you're not going to know how often the grievances have been written. And like Chris said, the toolkit that we have as part of this really kind of helps break this down to help guide us through this process. So another question, I mean, this one's pretty detailed, but I think this could be a situation that is applied to many people. So someone writes, as an RPCD, when I've clocked out and I'm about to leave, I'll question why a part-time supervisor is working. So the full-time supervisor will respond, we're short-staffed, you can clock in and help. The on-road supervisor says that they're not able to do that. So the question is the full-time supervisor's offer for that person to work, does that invalidate a grievance possibility, or can they still file for that supervisor working, if they've asked that member to work?
I'm going to try to take this one. In our building, if the driver's on the PM side coming in and they notice that they're short, let's say in this instance he clocked out and then clocked back in, no, he can still file, or anybody for that matter, for the time up until he was put on the clock. Anytime there's that issue, I know in our building we have 2 separate extra worksheets. One is for time, one is for full time. They should have exhausted that before a driver got back and noticed, hey, you're working. It doesn't negate that, it stopped it at the time. So if there's other members that say, hey, that supervisor was working for an hour prior to him coming back to the building, he can still file on that time, because it's any bargaining unit work that is our work.
And to piggyback off Lynette, that scenario shows a real lack of planning on management's part to cover their operation. That driver probably should have gotten a message when they were coming back to the building, hey, do you want extra work on the PM side, for example?
That's correct.
Right, thank you. Another question, we're going to probably just take a few more before we close out. But this person asked, what can be done when management sending people out or home and intentionally understaffing to meet their quote unquote plan? How do we address that?
If I can take this one, in our building, what we've started doing, of course, we all know first of the year, oh, we overstaffed or volume's low. So they were going around and asking members, hey, you want to go home? They started from the top down. And they said, okay, do I get my MOU, my 3-hour guarantee? They were like, what? Well, it's either my 3 or my 3.5. So our members started filing back and they're like, okay, we'll pay you your 3. So they started paying them. So all of our members decided, you know what, if you're going to send us home, you're paying us one way or the other, because we either get our daily guarantee or our 3-hour guarantee. Now, if you're in a situation where there's members that just go home and don't want to be paid, it gets a little tricky. But then it still puts it back onus on the supervisors. If there's egress issues, you file on that, you call OSHA. Members standing together, no, we're not going home, there's work to do. They've got to pay us one way or another.
Yeah, I want to chime in here for a second. Management voluntarily sending our members home and then performing their work is not an emergency. It's not an act of God. That does not give them the excuse to work. And fundamentally, this is probably a more important time than ever to fight back against that, because UPS is eliminating sorts across the country. If they're able to run an operation with 20 people instead of 25 and have 3 or 4 supervisors doing our work, those numbers show up on a spreadsheet when they're making decisions to do building closures or store closures.
So I think we'll take one last question before we wrap up. So this is, something, unfortunately, a lot of people do have to deal with this situation. So some people have asked, how do you get people to rally behind their shop steward or rally behind filing these grievances? Even if the steward is too close to management or doesn't care about being there, is not really into the job. How do you kind of keep people motivated, even if there's some of those barriers?
I'll try to take this one. The way I look at it, it is difficult because everybody has a different personality. Everybody has a different view on the job. The best thing I've learned over the years is when you have a meeting, those that want to be involved, and you have to keep going to those people who are involved, that want to be involved. If there's those people who genuinely don't like the steward, don't like the management, think you're too close. What we do in our building is I actually will have one of the other stewards reach out to those people that maybe there isn't some animosity. And those stewards will vice versa do that with myself. We try to work together to bring everybody together, different personalities, different perceptions. As for, I guess we don't deal with this in our building because none of the stewards and I, we are not friends with management, and we make that very clear. So I guess in that position, I would hope that somebody could find a steward that is their brother, there is their rank and file, that has their back.
I'd like to chime in on this. Yes. What we tend to do is try to have a group meeting during break. That way, management sees that you're organizing, and like the sister said, have a steward that's militant, and set up a meeting with you guys. And also, when you file the grievance, from my understanding in other locals, if there's a grievance filed, they'll pay the senior member, and that's not in the contract. So if you file the grievance, you demand to get payment. In the contract, read the language. It says the aggrieved employee or the grievant shall receive payment. In other locals, I think that deters members from filing because they don't reap the benefits of filing the grievance. They'll pay the senior employee on that shift. So, stay, demand you get paid for that grievance, and organize around during break. That way, it gives people more confidence in, if you find a steward that's willing to help, organize around that, even if, that steward has to come on a different shift.
Can I jump in here real quick at the end, Paul?
Yeah, sure.
If you just have an apathetic steward that's not willing to get involved in the process, you need to look at your local bylaws, learn how stewards are elected or appointed. And that's really where TDU comes in. TDU can help you with going over your bylaws, finding out how stewards are elected or appointed, help you run for steward if you're really ready to take management on. You've got this great network of activists that are willing to back you up. So it's a great resource. Make sure you use it.
All right. I think that's a great note to end on. Again, thanks first to all the members who've got on here sharing their advice and expertise. Thanks to everyone who joined to watch this webinar. So again, I'm seeing there's over 100 questions in the chat, which is amazing, but of course we can't get to them all. Please fill out this feedback form that we have posted on the screen here. This will allow us to try to address these questions for you to get involved. Also, this is a network. We can connect you to people like Lynette, Omar, Chris, Carlos, everyone else to help you in your building. So again, please fill out this feedback form. We will have the toolkit available to help you get through this. And next week we'll be having another webinar, so we hope to see many people on there as well. So thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.